presentation tonight. Stephen Saris is a retired physician, and he discovered art as part of his retirement activities. He went to the Art Institute in Philadelphia, and his thesis was on decapitated nude saints. And from that, we get tonight's presentation. So I'm just going to jump right into, that's enough introduction for Stephen, I think. I got your attention.
Stranger danger.
He's going to talk about Frida Kahlo and Georgia O'Keeffe, the people and their art. So welcome, Stephen.
I don't think I need the microphone, but I'll...
Oh, yes, yes, you do.
I need the microphone. All right.
Wait, it went off.
You just turned it off.
Off again?
Do I need the microphone? Okay. All right. Can we get the lights taken down? Let everybody, I want everybody to be comfortable so that you'll be sound asleep by the time I'm finished. Okay? Yeah, as Kit mentioned, I graduated from the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, which is a 4-year program, and at the end of third year and fourth year, you get a wall in their museum, which is a nationally known museum. And that was my thesis, both my third and fourth year, was decapitated nude saints. And the reason why I did decapitated saints as opposed to other saints was because I always had a difficulty making the head the right size for the body. So I found that if I had decapitated saints, it wasn't quite as noticeable, but the head was not the right size for the body. So that's how I did that. And that sort of leads me into what my point is in today's talk. Because I figure there are probably a number of you in the audience and on the ship who have heard of Frida Kahlo and Georgia O'Keeffe. And both of them are extremely famous, well-known artists, but they are known as female feminist artists, okay? And I'm not going to be talking about female feminist artists. I'm going to be talking about artists, okay? I will mention some of the spicy sex things just to see if you're listening, but the talk is going to be primarily on art, and does the head match the body, okay? That's really what I studied, and that's really what I want to show, is why Frida and Georgia are artists, what they were able to accomplish with paint on canvas, okay? So that's going to be that. Having made that whole entire introduction, I remember when I told my wife that I was giving a talk on this subject, and she said, what makes you think you're an expert in this? What makes you think you can talk about this topic? Okay? So the reason I can talk about this topic is because I've actually seen a Frida Kahlo painting. I know what she paints, how she paints. Okay? And so that's why I'm an expert on this, because if you've seen a painting, you can talk about it, okay? You don't need to know when they were born and when they died and who they were married to and who they had affairs with, or whether they cut off their ear or not, to really look at a painting, okay? All you need to do is look at where is the red, where is the blue, where is the line, where is the light, and decide if you like it or not. That's all there is to looking at a painting. Okay? It's not rocket scientists. Okay? So in any case, I'm going to go do all the stuff I just said I wasn't about to do. Okay? Frida Kahlo was born on July the 6th, 1907, and she was born in a suburb of Mexico City, and she died in the same house on July the 13th, 1954. She was a Mexican. She was educated as a middle-class girl at the time. She had every expectation that she would be a doctor. That's what she wanted to study. However, when she was 6 years old, she had polio, and that left her with a shortened, weakened leg. So she had difficulty walking around. And she was a frail, sickly thing, and so she spent a lot of time in bed, healing from her illnesses. And her mother bought her a special easel with a mirror atop, so she would sit in the bed, she would see herself in the mirror, and then she would do self-portraits. So that Frida did about 150 to 200 paintings in her lifetime, and over 100 of them are self-portraits. And people asked, why did you do so many self-portraits? And she said, it's because it's what I really know. Okay. And so when you see a picture of Frida Kahlo, it's the eyebrows. It's all about the eyebrows. Okay. She's famous for painting the unibrow. Okay. And that's how you can recognize a Frida Kahlo painting. Okay. She always painted herself uglier than she actually was. She never actually painted herself as beautiful as she was. She actually had a very pretty face. I don't have a photograph of her, but she actually did have a very pretty face, and she was very petite. Okay, this is a painting by her as well, again with the unibrow, and this is Diego Rivera, her husband. He's 20 years older than she, and he was a relatively famous muralist when they met. She was about 20, and they got married in 1924, I believe it was. Yeah. And her parents said it was like an elephant and a dove, because he was a big guy, and you can see he has his palette and brushes, and she was a very petite woman. At the age of 18, before they got married, she had been in a bus accident, and there was a piece of metal that went through her pelvis into her uterus, and she ended up being hospitalized for months and bedridden for months and doing some painting for months. And she never really fully recovered. And because she came from a middle-class family and she was married to Diego Rivera, I think she had somewhere in the range of 24 surgeries for her problems. And her paintings are notorious for being very sad, pain, a lot of discomfort. There's some paintings that are very colorful, but they're not very happy. It's not like people dancing around a maypole or any of that kind of stuff. There are several paintings where she's in the bed looking very anxious. There's one very famous one that she painted after one of her miscarriages. And again, I don't know who instigated it, but apparently they had a lot of, she had a lot of abortions. Diego Rivera fooled around. He had 4 wives. Frida was the 3rd wife, and according to Wikipedia, he had numerous children. Nobody knows exactly how many children he had, but he apparently had quite a number of children. And the 2 of them had a really volatile relationship, sort of the stereotypic Latinos. And so That is the painting that she did from the photograph when they got married. Okay. Frida never really had a formal art education. She is what is classified as a self-taught artist. Now, obviously, she was married to Diego Rivera, so she got to see what he did. She did have an art teacher when she was in school, and she knew a lot of famous artists. So it isn't like she didn't know how artists paint. But she chose to do the style of the traditional Mexican painting as opposed to European painting or Cubism or any of those kinds of things. She really tried to paint in the traditional Mexican style. Not to be outdone by her husband, she was also famous for having many, many affairs. This is where we get to the sexy part. She didn't do exclusively men. She did anybody who was willing. That's what made her interesting. That here she was, a woman who was long suffering, very small, wanting to make a living for herself by being an artist, in a man's world. And so I think that's one of the many reasons why she's considered a feminist. She's also in the
It's good.
okay. All right. That's not really the painting I want to show. Okay. This is Georgia O'Keeffe. Obviously, this is a photograph. This is not a self-portrait. This photograph was taken by Alfred Steinglitz. I'm not sure how many people in this room know who Alfred Steinglitz is, okay? He was Georgia O'Keeffe's husband. So he is also 20 years older than Georgia O'Keeffe. And he had a very influential gallery in New York City. Steinglitz went to engineering school. He also studied chemistry. And we're talking about 1884, when he bought his first camera. And as an engineer and as a chemist, it was obvious that the physics of the lens and the chemistry of development was just a natural for him. So he did a lot of photography, and by 1887, he was actually an established prize-winning photographer. And in the beginning of the 20th century, he opened a gallery in New York City that was predominantly photography. There was a magazine that came out with the exhibitions. But he did also do exhibits of painters. He was introduced to Georgia O'Keeffe's painting in 1917 and put on an exhibition. One place that I read, he exhibited her works without her actually knowing about it. Another place I read that she in fact had given her paintings to a friend who knew Steinglitz, and the friend presented them to Steinglitz, and that's when he put on an exhibition for her, and it was a very, very successful exhibition. And therefore, Steinglitz said, okay, well, you can come up to New York and I will give you a place to stay, and I will exhibit your paintings in my gallery. George O'Keeffe is a completely different story than Frida, because Georgia had about 20 years of art education. She went to the Art Institute of Chicago, which is world renowned even then, or probably more then than now. And she went to the Art Student League. She went to the University of Virginia. She studied in many places. She studied in New York City. She had all the credentials. And one of the things I'm going to try and do when we get to the paintings is to show the difference between a self-taught artist and a academic taught artist. And I will leave it up to you to decide whether you think one is superior to the other. But in any case, Steinglitz recognized her talent, and it didn't take long for everyone to recognize that George O'Keeffe was a major force in art. Remembering that in 1920, they were still doing Impressionist paintings. They were still doing Cubist paintings. They were still doing portraits, okay? And George O'Keeffe did totally abstract, okay? It's just a line. It's just a color. And there's no story. So she was just really ahead of her time. She was doing a whole new thing that nobody else was doing. And she was being rewarded. She was selling like hotcakes. And so when they got married, they met in 1918, they got married in 1924 as well. And by 1932, they were fighting each other. It was like, the rock star that says, yeah, any job you can get me is great. I'm so excited, yeah. And then they would say, I want better billing. I want, whatever. And so that starting in 1932, their relationship was known as being very close, but it was business. It was, I need you to do this for me, and you need to do this for me. Okay, so in 1929, she decided she would summer in New Mexico, and she would be in the season in New York City, because Alfred Steinglitz never left New York City. That's not true, never, but he rarely ever left New York State. But she would go with her friend Rebecca Stand and Luhan. And so she would summer in New Mexico and paint in New York. Frida and Georgia met each other in 1931. I'm trying to remember, I believe Frida went to Georgia's exhibition, and they met in 1931, and they hit it off. They were really good friends. However, Frida was following Diego Rivera all over the country and Mexico, because he is a muralist, and he was doing some very famous murals. The most famous mural that he painted was in 1933. He was painting the Rockefeller Center, and in that mural, he had an obvious picture of Lenin, and when the Rockefellers saw the picture of Lenin, they destroyed the painting, so you don't have that mural anymore. But it did make it clear that Diego Rivera was a communist, and in fact, Frida was more loyal to the cause than he was, but she had to tone that down in order that they could get jobs, commissions, painting. But Frida was such a fond communist that Trotsky stayed in her home in Mexico City from 1937 until 1939. And eventually he was shot in Mexico. And of course, everyone knew that she and Trotsky were doing their thing. And so in 1939, Diego Rivera and Frida got divorced, and that was a big time for Frida to do a lot of painting, because she was really trying to support herself with her art then. And then, but by 1940, they remarried, and they stayed married until Diego Rivera died or before that Frida died in 1954. When Frida died in 1954, she'd had several exhibitions, and in fact, she had one exhibition in Paris, and the Louvre bought one of her paintings from the exhibition in Paris. But she was not really in the top tier artists. Diego Rivera was. And it wasn't until 1970 that feminism found Frida Kahlo, and that's when all of the myths about feminism and Frida Kahlo, and to this day, I think there are more people who associate Frida Kahlo with her feminism and her struggle to survive with long-standing pain than they do with her actual works. But today, I will show you some of her actual works. Georgia was the exact opposite again from Frida. She was very reserved. She did not like to talk about her sex life. And there are letters of Frida's going to Georgia, but there are no letters of Georgia responding to Frida. So we don't know how Georgia actually felt. We only know how Frida felt about Georgia. And there's a section where she talks about, you didn't make love to me this time. So the question is, what do you mean by you didn't make love to me? Are you just not loving this time? Or were they really lovers? But there's always a suggestion that they were in fact lovers, and that the Rebecca Strand that was with Georgia in New Mexico a lot of the time, there was a question about their relationship. They were in fact partners, even though both of them were married. Rebecca Strand was married to Paul Strand. And the other thing about Georgia is that at this gallery with Strahan, there were some big-time artists. There was Charles Demuth, there was Arthur Dove, there was Marston Hartley, Paul Strand. And Georgia just eclipsed them. Those names I just told you probably aren't common names for you guys. Georgia O'Keeffe was just, leagues above them in her artwork. So the question that some people suggest is that if it hadn't been for Diego Rivera, Frida Kahlo would never have shown any artwork. And the question is, if there hadn't been Alfred Steinglitz promoting Georgia O'Keeffe, would Georgia O'Keeffe have been the force that she was? to me, that's a moot point, because artists have always needed a patron. Okay, if you were Van Gogh, and you had a brother that sold artwork in Paris, and even the brother only managed to sell one of his pieces while Van Gogh was still alive. And if you were Leonardo da Vinci, you had Louis XIV promoting your artwork. And if you were Michelangelo, you had the Pope giving you the commission for the Sistine Chapel. So, is it the artist or is it the promoter? Is it important? No. But there are people who say it's all because of their husbands that they became famous. I don't think that's true. Okay? And I'm going to tell you why I don't think that's true. Okay? Okay. This gentleman, Albert Barnes, I spent 3 years studying his philosophy on art. He is the one who really emphasized to me the importance of looking at the paint on the canvas. Okay? He has a terrific museum in Philadelphia, and he doesn't have anything on the wall. It doesn't have the name of the artist, it doesn't have the date that it was painted, it doesn't have a little description saying this was his family that he hated, or that he went a trip to yada yada yada, and this is what he saw. You just get the paint on the canvas. And you look at how the paint is applied, you look like where is it applied, what color is it light, is it dark, is it scary, is it happy? You know, what are the qualities of the image, not what is the history. I mean, to appreciate Van Gogh, you don't really need to know he cut his ear off. It has nothing to do with whether or not he cut his ear off. Okay? And there are a lot of people, when they see Frida Kahlo, or they see Georgia O'Keeffe, they think, oh, feminists, these are all, feminists. It has nothing, at least especially from Georgia, it has nothing to do with feminism. In fact, she said she wasn't a feminist. She said it's irrelevant what's going, sexuality is irrelevant to her paintings. You can decide when we go through her paintings. But there is no doubt about Frida's point of view. Frida's point of view is life is a bitch and then you die. Okay? That was Frida. Okay? Okay. Okay. So this is the first painting I'm going to talk about by Frida Kahlo. It was painted in 1929. So she was 22 years old. She knew Diego Rivera. And if you see Diego Rivera's murals, there's lots of people. So it's not unexpected that Frida Kahlo would do a painting with lots of people in it. But this is very atypical for, you'll see from the other paintings we're going to do, this is very atypical for her to have a painting with lots of people, and none of them have a unibrow. Okay? So none of them are Frida Kahlo. All right. These are what I'm impressed with when I look at this, is that this is a really strong line here. There's 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 a 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 line here. Okay? So it's really, okay? So when you look at this, it's really, and you don't really get a whole lot of depth. But she's doing something relatively sophisticated, which at least I was being taught when I was in art school, that you have a window and you go through the window and that gives you the depth. Okay? You don't stop right here at this wall. You actually get drawn into this window. Okay? And then, I'm sure from your distance, I don't know, But there's all these little trees that keep getting smaller, okay? And suggests that you're going back, okay? So even though the composition is really in your face, she does try and give you some depth, some sort of a landscape into the painting, okay? But she's not good at it, because here's the angle, all right? So that would suggest that this is actually going down, all right? But this length is identical to this length. This length is, okay? So that instead of getting narrower as you get further away, which is what perspective does, these are, again, in your face, okay? And this log is actually wider than this one or this one. And that one, again, should become smaller. So, again, you can say, this is a really nice painting of people, sitting, waiting for the bus. Or you can say, this is a painting where this person clearly doesn't understand perspective. Okay? The other thing is, if you, again, I don't know if you can see it, but she has an outline of the face, she has an outline of the nose, okay? All of them are outlined. Everything is outlined. And then it's a solid color, okay? There's no light coming from one direction or another. There's no shadow, okay? It's not really very realistic. It's just like a child or a coloring book. You make a picture and you color it in completely, all evenly. So again, this is definitely what we would call self-taught, naive, primitive, okay? But it is consistent with her need to do Mexican tradition, showing Mexican people in Mexican costume, which is what her goal is. So you can say, she doesn't know how to paint, or you can say, that's not important to her. The other thing that I find particularly interesting is this particular scarf. It suggests that there's like a really strong wind going on there. But these people don't look at all like they're facing a wind, okay? That's primitive style. Okay, now we come to the quintessential Frida Kahlo. You don't get just one Frida Kahlo, you get two. Two for the price of one. Okay? Unibrow. All right? Hair is usually all braided up. Okay? That's how you know it's Frida Kahlo. Okay? That's herself. Now, also you'll notice she has herself these dresses. Again, this is painted in 30? Yeah, this was painted in 39. Okay, this is just before the Second World War. And this is the way she's dressed. Okay? Frida Kahlo is famous for wearing traditional Mexican clothes all of her life. Okay? And that's the way she dressed. She wore traditional Mexican clothes. And she certainly doesn't look happy. And there is this thing here, which actually to me looks more like a bird cage, but everyone tells me it's actually blood. Okay? And there's this line here that goes, na 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 na. There's a line that goes, na 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 na. And there's a line that goes around the arm here. So I'm not sure whether this is like a transfusion or something. What is going on here? Okay? And she doesn't wear her heart on her sleeve. She wears it on her dress. Okay? And it's actually a pretty accurate heart. She has the ventricles and all that stuff. Oh, that reminds me. I forgot to tell you about Diego Rivera. When he was a student in 1904, when he was a student, one of the things that they did is they would take cadavers and they would learn to draw the muscles in the body. And a lot of times that was considered heritage, especially in a place like Mexico. But heresy. But any case, he would say, I don't know if he was joking or not, he would say he really relished eating the brains of women. So, I hope it was just a joke, But in any case, so it isn't like she didn't have hearts to use as models, okay? Because they are actually fairly accurate hearts, okay? But why there's a heart outside the dress, why is there's no expression on her face when there's the heart outside their dress and there's blood coming down, okay? So the question is, what is she trying to do? I think she was just doing what she always does, showing about how horrible her life is, and that she's just in constant agony and pain, and that her entire life that's what it was. And in so many of her paintings, that is the subject. This painting was painted in 45, so this is right after the Second World War. Okay? Again, this is a common theme for Frida. She's in a bed. Remember, she started painting in a bed when she was a child. So there are many scenes of her in a bed. This is not the most famous one, but this is the one I wanted to talk about. The most famous one, she's in a bed, and it was right after she had, I don't know if it was a miscarriage or an abortion. I think it was a miscarriage. And she was in Detroit, and she hated Detroit. She said it was too capitalist. She liked, the communism of Mexico. Any case, the reason I chose to do this is because in the Barnes method of analyzing a painting, this is right up his alley. Okay? Barnes loved distortion. He loved varied brushstrokes. Okay? And that's what's going on here. There's all these different things. What I find fascinating about this is the triangles. I mean, here's an obvious triangle. Here's a triangle. And then there's this, and this that forms a triangle. Okay? And triangles generally are stable. They make your painting composition very stable. Okay? But then when you put your triangle upside down, so the point, you lose your balance. Okay? So this painting speaks to me because it is both a combination of very stable and very off balance, which is, again, Frida's feeling about life. It's just off balance. Okay? And again, the perspective is totally off. This should not be bigger than this. The closer one should be the bigger one. Okay? This bed is like huge. Of course, she's small, but it's still out of proportion. And I don't know what this triangle is supposed to be. Okay? But what's going on here is triangles. Okay? You don't really need to know whether or not she's a feminist. Okay? It's triangles. That's what she's doing here. Okay, Frida Kahlo died, maybe of a drug overdose, maybe an accident. But she was taking lots of pain pills. She took lots of pain pills all of her life. And so one night she took, apparently, according to her nurse, 11 pills, and she was told you could not take any more than 7 pills. She was found dead in 1954. Okay, this painting is 1951. I think most people would call this a still life. Okay? It's obviously fruit. It's obviously a parrot. But it is, to my mind, ridiculously amateurish. And since I know that she can do things, I know she knows how to paint naively, but here she's trying to paint academically, maybe. Okay, you've got a light spot here, it gets darker as you go further away from the light. That would be normal, okay? You have a shadow, light coming from up here, you're casting a shadow onto the fruit underneath it. You're casting the shadow underneath here, okay? But there's no shadow here. There's no shadow here. There's a little bit of shadow there, okay? So she's trying to do academic style painting. But it's hard to believe that this person's been painting for 40 years. Okay? And I'm not quite sure what this is on. This must be a very dried out watermelon, because those seeds are in a really big pit. Okay? So, and she liked it enough, she actually signed it. So she thinks this is finished. She thinks this is worth signing. This is the worst of the ones that I saw. But I wanted to let you know why I think she's a bad painter. 40 years of experience and still doesn't know how to paint. Because this is not as good as the one that she started with the bus. Because the one at the bus was a consistent, naive painting. This is a bad academic painting. Okay? All right, now. Oh my goodness. All right, now we get to Georgia O'Keeffe. All right, again, very loose. Looks like somebody just did a little bit. But no, there's a lot of sophistication in this. This line is at just the right point to be under her breast. And in fact, if you can see, I don't know if you can see, she actually has nipples here, okay? The proportion of this arm to this arm is correct. The same thing with foreshortening and not foreshortening, okay? She has clearly understood perspective. She has clearly understood light and shadow, okay? I'm not quite sure what this is all about. But then again, I'm not a watercolor, so I don't know if that's just a mistake. And what I find particularly interesting is this dot. Is that a mistake? Or did she really want that dot there? Did she need that to balance this? I mean, would you fall off the page if you didn't have this dot? Okay? This is an extremely sophisticated painting. This is what Steinglitz exhibited in 1917. Because he could appreciate, and so did everybody else, this is not some kid playing with watercolor. This is somebody who has spent years studying how to paint. Okay, this is what you've all been waiting for. How can you look at this painting and not think vulva? I mean, is there anyone here who doesn't see vulva? I mean, according to Georgia O'Keeffe, it has nothing to do with vulva. Okay? But it is also another incredibly sophisticated painting in a time when people were doing almost exclusively representative art. Okay? But what's amazing about this painting is there's no straight lines. I studied a number of Georgia paintings for this lecture. I don't think she ever knew how to paint a straight line. There are no straight lines in any of her paintings. Everything has a nice curve to it, sort of found and lost. You know, here it's found, there it's lost. Okay? Again, that's a very sophisticated use of the brush and the color. And this, I love this. That really draws your eye. And then you have This, very sophisticated. Not an accident. Not an accident. And it, you know, it goes shoo, 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 shoo. Not an accident. She knew what she was doing. She is amazing, amazing artist. It looks simple, but it's not. I can't do that. I don't know how to do abstract. That's an amazing, amazing painting. Unfortunately, I can't think of anything but Volvo when I look at it. It's sort of embarrassing. Okay, so let's not do Volvo. Okay, this is probably one of, I think a lot of you have seen this. I think it was the cover of one of her table books. Obviously, it's representational. It's a flower, or 3 flowers, 4 flowers, okay? But again, what's interesting about it, it's another triangle. Doom, doom, doom. Very stable, that way. But there are these little curves all over the place. And then, of course, there's this green, which I assume are supposed to be leaves, all curves. So this, you get sort of this washing machine effect. It's just sort of swirling around. But the center is actually a very stable triangle. So you don't get lost, you don't get dizzy looking at this painting, because you have that triangle giving you some stability. And even though some of the things go off the edge, your eye doesn't get off the page. You're constantly being drawn back into it. Okay? And there's light, and there's dark, and there's, you know, just amazing, amazing, amazing talent. And this is why she was the best artist in her gallery, because she got it, and the others didn't have it to the same effect. Then there's this. This is 1965, you know, the pop era, optic art, all that kind of stuff. And also in 1965, I'm not sure what percentage of Americans had flown in an airplane in 1965. But this is the clouds underneath the sky. For most of us, we see that every time we fly. We see the clouds underneath us. But this was sort of novel idea, okay? But I still hate this painting. It's dull. The edges are too hard. It does get blurrier as you get further away, and this is a nice pretty paint, but it's just looks like a machine. Boom, 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 boom. Which is maybe what she wanted to do. She wanted to make the clouds look like they were machine made. Dull as dishwater to me. You know. 1965. Very bad year for art. Okay. This is what I love. This is what I take away from Georgia O'Keeffe in my own art. Most of my art is an icon, okay? When you have one object in the center, okay, surrounded by a color. In the Byzantine icon, it would be a gold leaf, okay? But she's chosen a beautiful shade of blue. In fact, I think she has blue in almost all of her paintings. I don't know, I haven't really looked for sure, but I think she uses blue beautifully. And she has these lovely little mountains at the bottom, so you get pulled into the distance. You don't fall off the page. You go in distance. This, I'm not quite sure what that is, but it does give some balance. If it didn't have that, this would be a little too top heavy, I think. So she needed something to give it a little bit of balance. Okay? And it's certainly much more realistic than her flowers. And it's certainly obviously a skull, you know, not an imaginary vulva. And all the beautiful shading and the cast shadows, you know, I mean, you can tell what direction these horns go because there's the cast shadow. There's the cast shadow, and the light's coming from above. So you know that it's forward. It's not backward. It's not behind. It's coming forward. Again, that is a sophisticated artist who does that. And Georgia O'Keeffe is a very sophisticated artist. She didn't need Alfred Steinmetz to be good. She might have needed him to be famous, but it did not to be good. One last thing, as I mentioned, Frida always wore Mexican traditional clothes. Georgia designed her own. This is the Georgia O'Keeffe collection. Tends to go mostly with black, and she said it was androgynous. It was, I mean, certainly this does look like a suit, but those two, I don't know, they look like dresses to me. But in any case, both of them had a real sense of style in addition to having an interest in painting. Thank you for listening. Okay, do we have time for questions, or do we? I don't know. I'm sure I was so brilliant you didn't have. You're just aghast. Oh yeah.
When I think of Georgia O'Keeffe, I think of high desert Mexico photography, right? Am I screwed up?
Well, you're not totally. Oh, he's asking about a photography of the desert, the high desert, like New Mexico. And again, she knew all these very famous photographers because of her husband was a photographer and he promoted photography. So there were many photographers at her home taking photographs. I'm not aware of Georgia O'Keeffe herself taking photographs, but she certainly painted the same things that the photographers were photographing. So I don't think you're far off. Yes?
She was also a sculptor. I was at the MFA in Boston within the last half a year, and she had some gorgeous sculpture. It was a Georgia O'Keeffe exhibit.
You said she was a sculptor? A sculptor. Okay, I thought. Okay, sculptor.
Also with very rounded, no sharp edges.
Yeah, I must admit I'm not familiar with her sculpture, but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, a lot of, especially when you're around, you know, the Mexican Indian art, I would think you would want to do that as well. Yeah. Yes.
For having a husband who was a photographer, I've never seen a picture of her.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Alfred Steinmetz did hundreds of pictures. And the first picture that's an Alfred Steinmetz. And he did, as I said, he did hundreds of them, and at least half of them are Georgia O'Keeffe nude. Okay? But he's very famous for her hands. Very famous for her hands. And I suspect that that's not the way she normally held her hands. Okay? But what I, again, looking at the photograph, and again, I'm not talking about Alfred Steinmetz, the photographer, but this button drives me crazy. I mean, he could have easily gotten rid of that button if he'd wanted to. Obviously, he did not want to. And I do think that you need that button, just like she needed that spot of blue with the blue watercolor, so that you don't fall off the page this way. This draws you back in. Okay? Okay, thank you very much.
great fun.
Thank you.
And there were several profound things I was going to say, and just intrigued with the art lesson you just gave us. We not only got to know the women and their art, but we are becoming artists ourselves. So, thank you very much, Stephen.